Hello everyone. Welcome to Dead Time Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love it for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's story.
Claire Langley woke to the sound of a phone ringing. It wasn't her cell. That was on silent, charging across the room. No, this was a duller, older sound, one she hadn't heard in years. A landline. She sat up slowly, the sheets tangled around her legs. The air in the bedroom was cold and still. A clock ticked softly on the nightstand, its hands pointing just past midnight. The ringing continued. She hesitated before moving. There was only one phone like that in the house, the ancient rotary one in the downstairs hallway. It came with the house, like the yellowing wallpaper and the oil-rubbed sconces. I hadn't thought it even worked. Still wrapped in her cardigan, Claire tiptoed out of the bedroom and down the creaky staircase. Her feet avoided the fourth step out of habit already. It groaned like something in pain. The house always felt like it was listening. The hallway was darker than it should have been. A single bulb flickered overhead as she reached for the receiver. "Hello?" she said softly, unsure why she whispered. Silence. Then a faint crackle. Not a clear connection, more like a detuned radio. Then came something she couldn't explain. A slow, rattling inhale, as though someone were standing just behind the speaker, breathing shallowly, irregularly. Claire's stomach twisted. A voice finally spoke, gravelly, male, barely a whisper, like it had to claw its way through the static. "Don't forget. Don't forget the walls." A click. The line went dead. She stood frozen, heart hammering. Her fingers slowly uncurled from the phone. The hallway was utterly silent, the kind of silence that feels dense. Her eyes flicked to the shadows at the foot of the stairs. Nothing moved. With a shiver, Claire returned to her room and locked the door, a habit she hadn't felt the need for before tonight. But she wouldn't sleep again for hours.
Claire awoke late, the gray light of morning seeping through the old lace curtains like smoke. Her mind was hazy, as if her dreams had left a film behind. The house was quiet, but not empty. She could feel it somehow, a low hum in the walls, a presence. She dressed quickly, tugging on jeans and a loose sweatshirt, trying to shake off the heaviness from the night. As she passed through the hallway, she paused near the phone. It looked the same as it always had. Chipped ivory casing, yellowed numbers, the coil of the cord stretched like a tired snake. No sign of use, no blinking light, no memory of the voice. She frowned and moved into the living room. That's when she saw it. On the wall, just above the baseboard heater, ran a thin black line. Not a crack. Claire had seen those before. This was too clean, too deliberate. It looked almost like someone had drawn it in charcoal, tracing an invisible boundary. It curved slightly at the end, almost like a hook. She knelt beside it and touched the surface. A smudge came away on her fingertip. Soot? Graphite? It hadn't been there yesterday. She stood and looked around the room as if expecting to catch someone hiding in the corners. But the cottage was still, bathed in the pale gold of morning light. The dust floated lazily in the air. No one was here. Claire fetched a damp cloth from the kitchen and returned to the wall. She wiped the mark once. It smeared faintly but didn't come away entirely. That was when the air shifted, just slightly. A faint breeze against the back of her neck, though no windows were open. She turned quickly, cloth still in hand. No one. Yet something in her gut tugged. A sensation she hadn't felt in years, since childhood. The sense that she was being watched by something standing just out of sight. That if she turned fast enough, she might catch it before it slipped away. She forced a breath, steadying herself. It's just an old house. Drafts and creaky boards. That's all. But the line remained. Thin, dark, and gently curving like the beginning of a spiral.
The rest of the morning passed slowly. Claire kept glancing at the wall. The mark impossible to ignore. It seemed darker now. No longer a faint smudge, but something bolder, as though it had grown overnight and was not finished. By noon, she'd stopped trying to clean it. The cloth only made it worse, dragging the soot-like material outward until it began to stain the wall in a strange halo. So she left it, wiped her hands on a dish rag, and opened the windows. The salty ocean air drifted in, cool and damp, but somehow not fresh. The air in this town always smelled old. The house creaked in its usual rhythm, pipes settling, floorboards shifting, the wind moving around the gables like a ghost running its hands along the siding. She told herself it was normal, even charming. The place had stood since the 1920s. Things shifted with age. But just after 3, she heard something she couldn't explain. It came from the attic. She was in the hallway, standing at the foot of the narrow stairs that led to the second floor, holding a mug of tea gone cold. The sound wasn't loud, barely audible really, but distinct. A rhythmic dragging, like something being pulled slowly across the attic floor. Then a soft thud. Another drag. Pause. Another thud. Claire set the mug on the banister. Her eyes locked on the ceiling where the attic hatch lay flush with the plaster. A simple string dangled from it, untouched. She'd only been up there once when she moved in. It was mostly empty, just a few old boxes from the previous owners and a rocking chair that sat awkwardly in the far corner beneath the tiny round window. The place had made her skin crawl even then. Too many angles, too much silence. Now the dragging sound came again, longer this time. Then another faint, deliberate thud. She didn't move, just listened. The kind of listening that happens when you're no longer trying to prove something exists, but to determine exactly where it is. Eventually, the sound stopped. Nothing more. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning beneath her weight, but she didn't pull the string. Not yet. Instead, she turned down the hallway to her bedroom and closed the door behind her. She needed time to think. Or maybe to forget. That night, Claire didn't sleep right away. She lay in bed with the lamp on, the light casting long shadows across the walls. Every groan of the house, every whisper of wind against the shutters felt too precise, like they were timed, intentional, like they were signals. Around 2 a.m., she got up and made tea. Again, the house was silent, save for the soft click of the kettle. As she stirred the honey into her mug, she felt a flicker of relief. The warmth grounded her,
and the familiar scent of chamomile filled the kitchen like a blanket. Then came a knock. 3 gentle raps at the back door. Not the front, the back, the one no one used. Claire stood frozen. No footsteps, no rustling on the porch, just a knock and then silence. She crept to the kitchen window and peeked through the curtain. The porch light was out. Only a sliver of moonlight illuminated the wooden steps. Nothing stirred. Then she saw him. A man stood at the edge of her backyard, just beyond the broken fence where the hydrangeas grew wild. He wore a heavy coat despite the mild night, and he stood very still, facing the house. Claire's breath caught. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood, watching. She backed away from the window and checked the lock on the door. It was secure. She moved quickly to the front door, locking it too, though it was already bolted. Then she turned out all the lights and crept to the upstairs window, her hands shaking. The man was gone. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, scanning the overgrown garden, the shadows of the oaks beyond. Nothing. Not even a rustling in the bushes. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe someone got lost. But deep down, Claire knew better. He hadn't looked lost. He looked like he belonged there. And something about the way he stood, completely still, arms at his sides, reminded her of something she couldn't place. She returned to bed and pulled the covers to her chin. That night, she dreamed of walls that breathed and whispered secrets in a language she didn't understand.
The following morning was heavy with fog. It clung to the window panes and dulled the light, making the house feel smaller somehow, like it had sunk further into the earth overnight. Claire stood by the kitchen window, cradling her mug and staring out into the pale blur where the backyard should have been. She hadn't seen the man again. She'd barely slept. Every creak had sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind against the walls had felt like a whisper just outside her hearing. She turned away and walked into the living room and froze. The line on the wall had changed. It had grown ever so slightly. It now curved gently leftward, beginning to spiral inward like the start of a nautilus shell. The mark was still faint and powdery, but undeniably larger. She hadn't touched it since the day before. Claire moved closer, her breath catching. There was something else now. A small notch at the end of the curve, like a hook, or a claw, or a mouth. She knelt and touched it again. The powder smudged under her fingers, still soft, still new. Her hand trembled as she wiped it on her jeans. It had grown overnight. She grabbed her phone and snapped a photo, then opened her camera roll to compare it to yesterday's picture. Only there wasn't one. She blinked, scrolled, checked the cloud folder. Nothing. No photo of the mark. No photos at all since she moved in, actually. She was sure, absolutely certain, she'd taken at least 3 pictures of the wall the day before. Had even debated sending one to her friend Willa, but now they were gone, as if erased, or as if the house never let them exist in the first place. Claire took another photo and saved it carefully. This time, she emailed it to herself, then printed a copy from the tiny wireless printer she kept for work. She needed proof. She folded the printed photo and tucked it into her notebook,
sliding it under a stack of cookbooks in the corner cabinet, just in case. As she straightened, the attic groaned above her again. 3 sharp knocks this time, not the dragging noise from before. Just 3 knocks, right above where she stood. The knocks echoed in Claire's ears long after they stopped. 3 precise, measured sounds, like someone rapping on the floorboards just above her, like someone or something was waiting. She stood there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. The hatch to the attic was directly above the hallway, just outside her bedroom. The string dangled, as always, barely swaying in the still air. She hadn't touched that string since the day she moved in. But now, as the afternoon wore on and the light grew dim behind the fog, Claire found herself standing beneath it once more. She brought a flashlight this time, just in case. Her hand reached up slowly. The cord felt stiff, the kind of rough cotton that collects years of dust. She gave it a gentle tug. The hatch opened with a soft groan, releasing a gust of air that smelled like old paper, mothballs, and something subtler, something damp and earthy, like a place that had forgotten sunlight. The pull-down ladder creaked as it unfolded. Claire stared up into the darkness. The attic yawned above her like a throat. She climbed slowly, one hand on the flashlight, her feet cautious on each narrow rung. When her head finally crested the opening, she paused. It was colder up here. Not freezing, but still, as if the air hadn't moved in years. She shined her flashlight around. Dust motes glittered in the beam. Old furniture, draped in moth-eaten sheets, lined the edges of the room. A stack of trunks slumped near the chimney. And in the far corner, just as she remembered, sat the rocking chair. Only now, it was facing the hatch. Claire swallowed. She stepped fully into the attic, heart pounding, the flashlight beam trembling in her grip. The floor groaned beneath her with each step, loud in the silence. She approached the chair. There was something in it. At first she thought it was a shadow, but as she got closer, she saw it was a shape, a bundle of something. Fabric? No. Rope. Twine. And tucked inside, a doll. An old-fashioned, handmade thing. Porcelain head, cloth body, one eye missing. The side of its face was cracked. The word hello had been written on its dress, in charcoal. Claire backed away, suddenly lightheaded. She turned off the flashlight and fled down the ladder without pulling the hatch shut behind her. Let it stay open, she thought. Let the house breathe. But the attic didn't feel like a room. It felt like a mouth.
Claire didn't go back up into the attic. Not that day, not that night. She slept on the couch in the living room with all the lights on, wrapped in 2 blankets and every ounce of logic she could muster. Old houses collect weird things, she muttered aloud at one point. Old toys, old smells, old air. But the truth was harder to swallow. Someone or something had put that doll there, and it had written a message. Not a threat, not yet, just a greeting. In the morning, sunlight made everything look duller, more ordinary. She brewed coffee with trembling fingers and took the printed photo of the spiral from under the cookbooks. Still there. She checked her email. The image had arrived safely. Good. Then she called Willa. Her best friend's voice answered on the 3rd ring, sleepy and raspy. Claire? It's barely 8. Are you okay? No. Yes. I need to talk.
She told Willa everything. Well, most of it. The line on the wall, the phone call, the attic, the doll. She left out the part about the man in the yard. Some things still felt too fragile to say aloud. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Claire," Willa finally said cautiously, "are you sure you're not just overwhelmed? Moving, new town, spooky house. You know how your mind runs when you're stressed." "I know," Claire said. "I thought that too. But the wall mark, it's getting bigger. And the photos I took of it disappeared. They just vanished." Willa was quiet again. Then, "Send me the photo you emailed yourself. I'll print it. If it disappears from mine too, I'll freak out with you." Claire chuckled nervously, grateful even for that sliver of normalcy. "Oh," I added, almost forgetting, "the doll had a message on it." Willa waited. "And?" "Just one word. Hello. Written in charcoal." More silence. "Claire," Willa said slowly, "did I ever tell you about my cousin's house in Fairford, the one with the writing on the walls?" Claire's stomach twisted. "No." "Okay, I'm texting you something. It's not the same, but it's close." Her phone buzzed a few seconds later. A photo of a wall and a spiral, almost identical to hers. Only this one had a second word written beside it, in crude block letters, "Stay." Claire stared at the photo Willa had sent her. It wasn't possible. The spiral in the image was nearly identical to hers. Same rough shape, same thickness of the line, even the same slightly uneven bend at the base. It looked like it had been made by the same hand. But this one had a word. "Stay." Written in the same charcoal smudge, sloppy, urgent, as if scratched in quickly before someone could stop them. Claire's fingers trembled as she zoomed in on the photo. She could almost feel the texture of it, the grain of the wall, the drag of ash or soot across paint. She called Willa back. "I'm looking at it," she whispered, glancing around her living room as if someone might be listening. "I told you," Willa said. Her voice was hushed now, too. "My cousin moved into a farmhouse outside Fairford years ago. Weird stuff happened. Drawings on the walls, words, smells, shadows, noises in the attic. Then the spiral showed up." "Did anyone figure out what it meant?" Claire asked. "No. It just kept growing slowly. He covered it with a bookcase eventually, but he said he could still feel it behind the shelves, like it was pulsing. He left after 6 months." "Why?" Willa was quiet a moment. "There was a third word," she said finally, "after stay." Claire waited. "Under," Willa whispered. All caps. "Under." Like something was beneath the spiral. Or maybe the floor. He wouldn't tell me more after that. Claire felt a cold tightness in her chest, as though the air in the room had thickened. "Did he ever check?" she asked. "What was under it?" Willa exhaled. "No. Or if he did, he didn't say. He wouldn't talk about it again. He moved across the country." Claire looked slowly at her wall. The spiral hadn't changed since yesterday. Or had it? She couldn't tell anymore. There was no word on hers. Not yet. But the spiral, it looked deeper now. Not just darker. Deeper.
Claire spent the rest of the day avoiding the spiral. She couldn't help glancing at it every time she passed the living room, but she made no move to touch it or go near it. Even when the air felt wrong, just slightly colder in that corner of the house, she ignored it. By late afternoon, she'd convinced herself to do something about it. She needed to know what was underneath, not just beneath the spiral, but beneath the wall itself. She retrieved a utility knife from the drawer and stood in front of the mark. Her fingers itched with nerves the way they used to before making a cold call at work or walking into a room full of strangers. Only this time, she wasn't scared of people. She knelt down, pressed her hand flat against the wall, and slowly dragged the blade along the curve of the spiral. Paint flaked away. Beneath it, thin plaster. She scraped further, pulling away a small section. Dust floated out, soft and gray like ashes. Then she saw it. Beneath the layers of paint and primer, there was something else. Wallpaper. Old, yellowed, patterned with faded vines and little red roses. Claire blinked. She hadn't known the walls were papered underneath. She dug further, tearing away a larger chunk. More vines. But now she saw something between them. Letters. Someone had written on the wallpaper beneath the paint. Not recently. The ink had faded, smudged by time, but it was there. She leaned in, heart thudding. The words were scattered, fragments only. They hear when you whisper. Don't scratch too deep. She lives in the wall. Mouth behind the plaster. Claire's breath caught. The edge of the spiral now cut directly through one of the sentences. The spiral is a... The rest was missing. She sat back on her heels, the room tilting slightly, not from motion, but from the weight of what she was beginning to understand. This wasn't a new haunting. It had been here long before her, maybe long before anyone. And someone, sometime, had tried to leave a warning. Claire stood and backed away from the wall. The spiral watched her. It didn't have eyes, but it watched. That night, the scratching began. At first, Claire thought it was the wind again. This close to the coast, storms came in suddenly. Dry leaves brushed against siding, and old beams flexed like bones shifting in their sleep. But the sound didn't come from outside. It came from inside the wall, just behind the spiral. She lay on the couch again. Her bedroom now felt too far, too vulnerable, and stared at the ceiling as the sound grew louder. A faint, irregular scrape, then a pause, then again, closer this time, like nails or claws, testing. She held her breath. The spiral was behind her, just on the other side of the wall that backed the couch. She could feel it there, the weight of it. Its shape burned behind her eyes like an after-image, even in darkness. The sound continued, scrape, pause, scrape, scratch, until it began to form a rhythm. It wasn't frantic. It was deliberate, curious, almost intelligent. Claire sat up slowly. The lamp buzzed faintly as she turned it on. The light spilled into the corners of the room, illuminating nothing but casting shadows that seemed too long, too deep. She stepped off the couch, turned around, and faced the spiral. The mark hadn't changed visibly, but the wall beneath it seemed strained, like stretched skin, as though the surface might split open if pressed hard enough. The scratching stopped. She stood there for several minutes, waiting, barely breathing. Then, something moved behind the plaster. She saw it, no mistake this time, a ripple, a pulse, like a hand brushing against the wall from the other side. Claire stumbled backward, her legs hitting the coffee table. Silence returned. And then from upstairs, the sound of the attic ladder unfolding by itself. Slow, wooden, deliberate.
Claire didn't move for a long time. She stared toward the stairwell, willing the attic ladder to be a mistake, a trick of memory, of the wind. But she had heard it, every groaning inch of wood, every creak as the ladder descended. Eventually, her body remembered how to move. She grabbed her flashlight from the kitchen drawer. She'd left it there after the attic, and made her way up the stairs, slow and barefoot. At the top, she stood at the edge of the hallway, heart thudding like thunder in her ears. The attic hatch hung open above her.
The ladder reached down like a tongue. The air was colder here, not a draft, an absence, a void. She raised the flashlight, its beam slicing into the hatch's mouth. She called out softly, "Hello!" Nothing. She climbed. Each rung protested beneath her weight, but the house held. When her head reached attic level, she paused. Something had changed. The rocking chair now faced the far wall. Not the hatch, not the window, a different wall entirely. The doll was gone. Claire stepped into the attic, sweeping her light carefully across the space. And then she saw them. More spirals. Dozens, no, hundreds, drawn across the wall in charcoal, graphite, soot, and possibly even old blood. Some small as coins, others as wide as dinner plates. Some were scrawled in haste, others perfectly formed, geometric and symmetrical, like sacred patterns. And in the middle of it all was a message written in thick strokes. It opens if you stand still. Claire's throat tightened. She took a step back. The floor groaned beneath her heel. And something else moved in response. A sound like cloth shifting, like knees on wood. She turned her flashlight quickly, catching the briefest glint of something retreating into the far corner behind a stack of crates. She froze, light held steady. Nothing there, but she knew she'd seen it. Not a person exactly, a shape, pale, slight, watching. She backed toward the ladder, and as she climbed down, the scratching behind the living room wall resumed, this time louder, hungrier. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat curled on the couch, with every lamp in the house lit, her body tense, her thoughts racing through memories she wasn't sure she trusted anymore. Had she really seen movement in the attic? Had the chair turned on its own? Had the doll vanished? Or had it never really been there? The scratching continued until almost 4 a.m., growing slower, softer, eventually dissolving into a kind of breathing. Not hers. The wall breathed, in and out, like lungs buried in plaster, like something just beneath the surface was mimicking her rhythm, waiting to sink. She thought of the writing beneath the wallpaper again, mouth behind the plaster. At dawn, when silence finally returned, Claire stood and approached the spiral again. It hadn't visibly changed overnight, but somehow it felt deeper. The curve seemed to reach further inwards, like a tunnel drawn flat on a surface, but descending infinitely inwards, impossibly so. She reached out and placed her palm against the wall. It was warm. Not like heated air from a vent. No. This was organic warmth, damp and pulsing just faintly, like skin under fever. She yanked her hand back, heart racing. She turned to leave, but stopped. There was something in her palm, a smear of black, charcoal. The mark had transferred to her skin, though she hadn't touched the spiral directly. Her hand hadn't brushed the line, only the wall beside it. Still, there it was, a faint spiraling curve now drawn into her palm. She rushed to the sink, scrubbing her skin with soap and hot water until it stung. The smear faded, but didn't vanish completely. That afternoon, Desperate for distance, Claire walked into town. She wandered through narrow lanes of antique shops and weathered buildings, all wrapped in quiet salt air. The town had always felt empty, but now she felt it pressing in, a hollow silence hanging behind every window, every shuttered cafe. She stepped into a used bookstore near the harbor. The bell above the door jingled. An old man behind the counter looked up and blinked at her. Then he frowned, staring at her hand. "You've been in the house." Not a question.
Claire froze in the doorway, hand still clutching the strap of her bag. The old man stared at her, unmoving behind the counter. His face was lined with deep, uneven wrinkles like weathered bark, and his eyes were the dull gray of fog on still water. "What house?" she asked carefully, though she knew what he meant. He nodded toward her palm. "The spiral," he said. "It marks you. You touched the wall." Claire instinctively shoved her hand into her pocket. "It's just a stain. Charcoal." He laughed, but it wasn't mean. It was tired. They always think that, the first week anyway. Claire took a step closer. "You've seen it before?" He nodded slowly. "More than once. That place, it shows up every few decades. No one owns it long. People think they're moving in fresh, a fixer-upper, a charming little cottage by the cliffs." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "But the house doesn't belong to anyone. It keeps itself." Claire's skin prickled. The old man shuffled around the counter, limping slightly. He motioned for her to follow and led her to a dusty shelf near the back. He pulled down a large black ledger, its spine cracked with age. "Names of tenants," he said. "Some I knew, some just appeared. All of them left within a year." He flipped through the pages, each one bearing lists of names, hastily written notes, dates. Some pages had been violently scratched out, others marked with question marks, or simply the word "gone." He found a name and tapped it. "Darren Lynch. Lived there before you, about 5 years ago." Claire scanned the entry. There was a note next to his name. "Wrote symbols, heard voices, sealed the attic." She swallowed. "What happened to him?" The old man shook his head. "Don't know. Police came, found the place empty. Front door wide open. No signs of struggle. Just gone." Claire stepped back, the ledger blurring in her vision. "He said the spiral was a lock, or maybe a door. He wasn't sure which." Claire's heart was pounding now. "Which is it?" she asked. The man looked at her with something between sorrow and fear. "It depends," he whispered, "on whether it opens from your side or theirs." Claire stood frozen, staring at the ledger in the bookshop keeper's gnarled hands. Her mouth felt dry. She couldn't stop looking at the scribbled note beside the name. Wrote symbols, heard voices, sealed the attic. She felt as if she was reading her own future in past tense. "I need to know more. Do you have anything else? Anything about the spiral?" The man hesitated, then motioned toward a crooked bookshelf behind the register. "There's a drawer under that one. Locked. I kept the rest of the notes there. Didn't want people snooping." Claire followed him, heart racing, as he rummaged in a battered tin box for the key. It took him nearly a minute to find it, his hands trembling slightly. When he finally unlocked the drawer, he slid it open to reveal a collection of yellowed papers, brittle with time. He picked up a folded sheet. "This one," he muttered.
This came from a priest, used to visit the house in the 60s. Said it was full of voices, suffering voices, begging from the walls. He left this before he vanished. Claire unfolded the page. The writing was frantic, black ink scrawled in looping script, like someone had written it while trembling. The spiral opens. It is a whisper made shape, a language too old for tongues. It pulls from behind the wall, beneath the floor, above the ceiling. It watches through grain and dust. It learns your name. Once marked, it remembers you. Claire's eyes widened. Beneath that passage, a drawing. The spiral again. Her spiral. Only this one had 7 rings, each ring labeled with a name. None of them were hers. But one stood out. Darren Livch. Same man from the ledger. She looked up. Did anyone ever find out where he went? The old man looked away. Some say they hear him in the attic still, tapping, whispering through the vents. The house forgets their bodies, he said softly, but it keeps their voices. Claire folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket. Can I keep this? He nodded, as if he'd expected her to take it all along. Be careful, he said, walking her to the door. Don't try to erase it. Don't ignore it. And for God's sake. He paused with his hand on the doorframe. Don't ever answer it when it knocks from the inside.
Claire walked home, clutching the priest's letter in her coat pocket like it was a lifeline. The fog had rolled in thick over the harbor, making the streets ghostly. Shapes flickered behind windows, too tall, too still. She kept her eyes forward. Her house greeted her like always. Crooked porch, chipped white paint, door that stuck slightly when she opened it. But stepping inside now felt like entering something conscious, something that had waited. She locked the door behind her. Everything was as she left it, quiet, still. But the silence felt heavy now, like a breath held too long. Claire pulled out the folded page and laid it on the kitchen table. The names on the spiral, the 7 rings, the way they curved inward, suggested something ritualistic, purposeful. Each ring was a step, a threshold, and Darren Lynch had been the 6th name. Did that make her the 7th? She turned toward the living room, toward the wall. The spiral looked unchanged, but the room smelled different now, old and bitter, like scorched wood and damp metal. She leaned closer to the wall and noticed something strange. The heating vent just below the spiral was whistling softly. The system wasn't on. She knelt and placed her ear close to the vent grill. For a long moment, nothing. Then, a faint whisper. Not wind, not air. A voice. Too muffled to understand, but there, urgent and rapid, speaking in a cadence she didn't recognize, a language full of clicks and hisses. Then came another sound, deeper, like someone breathing through water. Claire jerked back. The spiral above the vent seemed to shimmer slightly, not visibly, but her eyes felt pulled. She took a step away. That night, she tried to sleep in her bedroom again. She locked the door, dragged a chair in front of it, and buried herself under the blankets. But sometime after midnight, the vent beside her bed began to speak again. It whispered until dawn, and just before morning, she heard a soft knock, 3 slow taps against the vent grill from the inside. Claire didn't scream. She wanted to when the knock came from inside the vent just inches from her bed, but some deeper instinct told her to stay silent, as if reacting too strongly might encourage it, might invite it. She stared at the vent in the dark,
breath shallow. The room was utterly still. The knocking had stopped, but the air felt disturbed, like a hand had reached through and stirred the molecules, rearranged the silence. Then a whisper came through, soft, careful, and this time it used her name. Claire. Her entire body stiffened. It wasn't a threat, not yet. The way it said her name was almost reverent, like it had been practicing or waiting for the right moment to speak it aloud. Then more whispering followed, words she couldn't understand, some fast, others drawn out like moans stretched into syllables. A few were repeated. Claire felt, without knowing how, that some of those words were names. Not just names spoken, but called. She gripped the edge of the mattress. She didn't sleep. Not even after the voice faded, replaced by a soft, continuous breath that hummed through the vent until first light. It was almost content, as though something had moved closer. At dawn, she arose and went to the living room. The spiral had grown again. This time she didn't need to measure it or compare photos. The new curve was obvious. The lines had thickened, widened like a root pushing through soil. The seventh ring was halfway complete, and something new had been added. Another word, written beneath the spiral in faint smeared charcoal. Listen. Claire backed away, heart hammering. The vent beneath it sighed, once, like something exhaling in satisfaction. She remembered the shopkeeper's warning, don't answer when it knocks from the inside. But it already knew her name, and now it was whispering others.
The sun stayed hidden behind thick gray clouds all day. Claire didn't open the curtains. She moved through the house like a trespasser, stepping lightly, glancing at walls like they might turn to face her. She kept the radio on in the kitchen, static humming low beneath a jazz station that sometimes cut out without warning. The house didn't like noise, she had decided, but silence gave it permission to speak. In the afternoon, desperate for any distraction, she began pulling up the rug in the hallway. It had been buckling since she moved in, and she'd tripped over it more than once. Something solid jutted beneath it near the wall. She peeled it back and froze. Scratched into the wood beneath were names, 10 of them, each etched with deep, frantic strokes. Some had been nearly carved through the boards. The wood was stained dark around a few of them, almost black. Ink, charcoal, or something else. She recognized one instantly, Darren Lynch. Another name chilled her even more, Agnes Caro. The name had appeared in the priest's scrawled notes, and beside it, Claire's breath caught, Willa Ames. She stared at it, knees going weak. Her best friend's name scratched into her floor. She yanked out her phone, dialing Willa with shaking fingers. Voicemail. She tried again and again. On the third try, the phone clicked, but no one spoke. Just a long, low breath, then a faint whisper. Claire. Click. She dropped the phone. The spiral was spreading through the house, not just on the wall, not just in charcoal. It was beneath the rug, etched in names, in wood, in memory, and it had reached Willa. Claire couldn't reach Willa for the rest of the day. Her texts went unanswered, calls dropped mid-ring. Even the emails she sent bounced back with a vague, undeliverable error. It was like her best friend had slipped out of the world.
and her name was still there, etched into the wood. Deep, angry cuts, as though someone had written it in desperation. She sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the priest's page. 7 rings in the spiral, 7 names, but there were 10 on the floor. Some had been scratched out violently, others left untouched. Maybe not all names stayed. Maybe some were erased by the house. She stood suddenly, needing to move, to find anything that made sense. She wandered upstairs, flashlight in hand. She hadn't explored the second floor much, only her bedroom and the attic hatch. The other doors had been closed when she arrived, and she had left them that way, unopened. She paused before one now, the last room at the end of the hall. Its doorknob was ice cold. Claire opened it slowly. Inside was a small room, maybe 10 feet square. Faded wallpaper peeled in thick curls from the corners. A narrow bed sat flush against the wall, its mattress gone to rot. A rocking horse stood by the window, one eye missing, jaw painted in a smile too wide. And on the wall, above the bed, another spiral, smaller, sloppier, drawn in red. Beneath it, the words, "The girl sleeps behind the door." Claire's pulse spiked. She turned to the closet in the far corner, an old latch-style door, low to the floor, almost child-sized, the kind you'd expect to find toys in, or bones. She didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she backed out of the room and closed the door behind her. As she turned, she saw it. A new message had been written on the hallway wall, still fresh, still wet. "She remembers you."
Claire stared at the message on the hallway wall, her throat tight. "She remembers you." It hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. She reached out, fingers hovering just above the letters. The substance wasn't paint or charcoal. It was slicker, thicker. She didn't want to know what it was. She stepped back. Something had written this while she was in the forgotten room. Something fast, quiet, watching. And it remembered her. But who remembered? The girl behind the door? The voice in the vent? The thing that moved in the attic shadows? Or the house itself? Claire backed into her bedroom, locking the door. She dragged her dresser in front of it this time, not just the chair. She unplugged the vent fan, taped the vent cover closed, then turned off all the lights except the lamp by her bed. She sat cross-legged on the mattress and pulled out the priest's paper, spreading it across the blankets. Her eyes traced the spiral. 7 rings. 7 names. 1 ring left unfinished. But when she counted the rings again, there were now 8. She blinked. Counted again. 8. She pulled out the photo she'd printed of the wall on her second day in the house. There were only 7 then. Clearly, distinctly. The spiral had grown. Quietly. Invisibly. And it hadn't waited for her permission. A low knock echoed from the hallway wall. Not at the door. From inside the wall itself. She held her breath. Knock. 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 The same rhythm. Always 3. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Then came the whisper. Not through the vent, but through the plaster. open. It was different this time. Not a command, a plea, a yearning. Claire pressed her palms against her ears. She counted, breathed, waited. Eventually, the whisper stopped, and somewhere, far above, the attic rocking chair began to move, slowly, steadily, on its own. Creak, creak, creak. The rhythm of remembering. By morning, the whispering had stopped again, but Claire didn't feel relief, just a taut silence, like the house was holding its breath. She hadn't slept, not truly. Every time her eyes began to close, a sound would start. Rustling, whiskering, the creak of the attic chair. Like the house didn't want her to forget, not even for a moment, that it was alive, that it was watching. She needed light, movement, answers. She returned to the small room at the end of the hall, the one with the child-sized closet door. Her hand hovered over the latch. Her reflection in the tarnished brass knob looked stretched, distorted, smaller somehow, younger. With a deep breath, she opened it. Inside was darkness, not a void. There was structure, but it was cramped, steeped in a smell like mold and copper. She flicked her flashlight on and pointed it in. At first, she thought it was empty. Then the light caught something scrawled on the far interior wall. Not a spiral this time. An eye. Drawn in dark red charcoal, the eye took up nearly the entire back panel of the closet. It was crude, uneven, but unmistakable. Wide open and surrounded by markings that looked like ancient runes, or perhaps scratches made by fingernails. Directly beneath the eye, a series of short vertical lines, 11 of them, had been carved into the wood, like tally marks. She traced them with the tip of her finger. The wood was soft, damp, almost like flesh. She pulled her hand away quickly, then noticed something else. In the corner, half buried in dust, was a single black shoe, child-sized, scuffed, faded pink laces. She pulled it out and turned it over. Something was written on the sole. Agnes. Claire staggered back. Agnes Caro. Another name from the floorboards. Another voice remembered by the house. The closet door creaked slightly as she stepped away. Just a settling hinge, she told herself. But she didn't look back. And as she shut the door, she swore the pupil of the painted eye shimmered, just faintly, as if adjusting to the light.
That night, Claire dreamed of the room. Not just any room, but the small, forgotten one at the end of the hallway. Only in the dream, it wasn't decayed. The wallpaper was clean and vibrant, the rocking horse new, the bed neatly made with crisp white linens. She stood in the doorway, unable to move forward. A child sat on the bed. A little girl. She had long black hair and wore a pale dress, hands folded in her lap. She did not look at Claire, but Claire knew she was aware of her. The girl spoke without moving her lips. "You were here before." Claire tried to reply, but no sound came. "You opened the door once, and it let you go, but now you came back." Her heart pounded. She shook her head in the dream. No, that wasn't right. She had never been here before. You forgot, the girl whispered. Her voice was inside Claire's skull now, vibrating like something buzzing behind her teeth. Claire felt herself being pulled forward toward the closet. The child stood. Her eyes were dark voids now, swirling spirals carved into her face. She raised a hand and pointed. The closet door creaked open. Beyond it, no eye, no tally marks, only a long, narrow hallway stretching far past the bounds of the house. Its walls pulsed with living muscle. Its ceiling wept water from cracks in the seams. Spirals covered the walls in thick, black ink, and along the floor lay shoes, small shoes, dozens, hundreds, all left neatly in pairs. Claire stepped back, but the floor softened beneath her feet like wet clay. The girl whispered one last thing. You're almost home. Claire awoke with a scream caught in her throat. Her sheets were twisted around her ankles. The lamp was off, and on the mirror across from the bed, written in breath and fading fast, was a single word: back. Morning brought a heavy fog that pressed against the windows like a thick hand, blurring the trees and the street beyond into formless shadows. The word on the mirror, back, had long since faded, but Claire still saw it every time she looked up. She spent hours pacing the house, checking doors, listening for sounds behind the vents. Silence now, as if the house were waiting, curious what she would do next. Eventually, she found herself in the attic again. She hadn't meant to climb the ladder. She barely remembered pulling the string. But the attic was brighter today, sunlight filtering through the tiny round window in watery shafts. The spirals on the walls remained, their lines darker now, more confident. Some had grown additional arms, twisting like antlers or branching into other shapes. One had become a perfect circle, filled with smaller eyes. In the far corner, the rocking chair still faced the wall. She stepped carefully toward it, flashlight in hand, though the room didn't seem to need it. There was something tucked under the chair's curved leg, a folder, thin, yellowed with age. Inside, she found a stack of photographs. Most were black and white, some tinted faintly with sepia. Old, decades old. Children. Each photo captured a child standing in front of the house, her house, though it looked subtly different in each shot. Shutters changed, a porch vanished, a window became a boarded void. But the children, their faces were all turned toward the camera, except their eyes. Their eyes always looked off to the side, as though something else was standing just out of frame. Claire's hands shook as she reached the last photo. It was newer, colored, creased, but more recent. It showed a woman standing in front of the house, smiling, not at the camera, but at someone beside it. The woman was Claire. Same face, same hair, but she didn't remember this photo being taken. And in her version of the house, the window behind her hadn't yet been boarded shut.
Claire stared at the photograph in her trembling hands. Her own face looked back at her, unmistakable. Same jawline, same eyes, same crooked smile she hated in pictures. And behind her stood the house, though something about it was wrong. The third upstairs window. It was there, clear as day, with curtains drawn and pale light behind the glass. But there was no third window. Not anymore. Only two windows faced the backyard now, her bedroom and the hallway. The space where the third would have been had long been sealed, plastered over and papered into oblivion.
She checked again, climbing out the attic and pacing the upstairs hall. The wall between the bedrooms was solid, smooth, no seams, no indentations. And yet, she pressed her ear to the wall. Silence. Then, faintly, a thump, like something falling or moving inside the wall. Claire backed away. She rushed downstairs, grabbing the folder of photos and the priest's notes, laying them all out on the kitchen table. Each child in the photos, each tenant had stood in front of the house. In each, the number of windows changed. 3, 2, 1. The more recent the photo, the fewer the windows. It was as though the house was swallowing itself, sealing pieces of its past or hiding them. She flipped the last photo over. There, written faintly in pencil, "Don't forget the third room." Claire's eyes widened. The sealed wall upstairs wasn't between the hallway and her bedroom. It was a space of its own, a narrow chamber that had been covered up, forgotten. A third room. She grabbed a flashlight and her utility knife and ran back up the stairs. At the top landing, she paused. The wallpaper on the far wall looked older than the rest, more faded, curling at the edges. The floral pattern didn't quite match the rest of the house. She pressed her fingers to the center of it. Hollow. She drew the knife and began to cut. Behind the paper, behind the paint, there was wood, thin, mismatched planks nailed hastily together. And carved into one of them, in jagged letters, "You came back." Claire stepped back. The wood creaked beneath her feet. Then, from behind the wall, she heard it. A soft, high giggle, a child's voice, right next to her ear. Claire froze. The laughter was unmistakable, light, girlish, and impossibly close, not behind the door, not in another room, right beside her, as if the wall itself had lips. She backed away slowly, never taking her eyes off the hollow section she had exposed. The name Agnes flickered across her memory. The closet, the shoe, the painted eye, and now the third room. She grabbed her hammer from the utility drawer downstairs and returned, hands trembling. She hesitated only once before raising it and driving the claw into the seam between the old planks. The wood cracked with a dry gasp. She pried away a panel, then another. Dust spilled out in small clouds. The smell hit her next. Mildew, something sweet and rotten like flowers left too long in stagnant water. She shined the flashlight through the hole. Beyond it lay a narrow room, barely wide enough to crouch in. The floor was covered in dust and crumpled cloth. The walls were lined with scratch marks, clawed in erratic spirals. Some of them bled into one another as if drawn in panic or desperation. At the far end was a shape. Claire's breath caught. She crawled through the opening, light trembling in her grip. The shape was a figure, child-sized, wrapped in a sheet that was once white, now gray and yellowed with age. It was slumped in the corner like a forgotten toy. She reached out. The shape shifted. Not a flinch, not a movement of its own. It breathed. Claire scrambled backward into the hallway, gasping. Her flashlight dropped and clattered to the floor. The beam spun wildly across the inside of the hidden room and caught a face. Porcelain. Cracked. The doll. But its mouth was different now. It was open. Wider than it should be.
Claire slammed the wall panel shut behind her, sealing the third room back into silence. Her breaths came fast and shallow as she leaned against the hallway wall. The air was thick with dust and something else, something sour like rust and old breath. She had seen the doll again, the same one from the attic, only now its mouth was gaping, pulled wide into a grin that didn't belong to porcelain. It hadn't been placed there. It had returned, and it had spoken. Let her out. Claire ran downstairs, locked every door, every window. She dragged furniture in front of the attic hatch. She taped the vents shut again. Then she sat at the kitchen table and laid out everything she knew. The spiral was growing, ring by ring. The names were being added, one by one. The voices whispered from vents, from dreams, from behind the walls. Agnes was still here, and now the house wanted her out. Or maybe wanted someone else out. She looked at the priest's page again, at the final line scribbled in the margin, barely legible. Do not finish the spiral. Claire's breath caught. She rushed into the living room toward the wall with the original spiral. It had grown again, now complete, all 8 rings, a perfect nautilus etched in soot and something darker. And in its center, fresh that morning, was a new name. Claire Langley. She stepped back. No smudging it, no washing it. The wall pulsed faintly beneath the spiral like a living thing, as if breathing through bone. And underneath her name was a new word, carved in jagged script deep in the drywall. Open. At that exact moment, every light in the house went out. Silence fell. Then, slowly, from upstairs, the sound of the attic ladder descending once again. Only this time, it didn't stop with a thud. It creaked and creaked and creaked, like footsteps coming down it, one by one. Claire didn't move. She stood frozen in the dark, the spiral's last ring still glowing faintly in her mind, her name etched in the center like a key turned in a lock. And now the ladder creaked under weight that wasn't hers. One slow step, then another. She didn't need light to know something had crossed the attic threshold. She backed slowly into the kitchen, hands fumbling across the counter for a flashlight. Her breath caught as her fingers found it. She flipped the switch. Nothing. Dead. She reached for her phone, but the screen was black, drained even though it had been charging just hours earlier. The house hummed with a deep, pressing silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of attention. Then, a step. Not on the ladder now. On the upstairs hallway floor. She ran. She grabbed her keys, stumbled over the rug, and flung open the front door. Thick fog choked the yard. The street beyond was gone, swallowed in gray. But something was standing at the edge of the porch. She skidded to a stop. The same man from before, the one who had watched from the garden weeks ago, stood there, motionless, wearing the same dark coat. Only now she could see more clearly. His skin was gray, not pale, gray like wax. His eyes were black and sunken. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, and when he lifted his hand and pointed toward the open door behind her, she understood. He wasn't stopping her. He was inviting her back in. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind her with a sound like the house inhaling. And when she turned back to the porch, he was gone, vanished into the fog. Only the stillness remained. And from upstairs, the footsteps resumed, faster now, descending the stairs. Not rushing, not frantic, just inevitable. Claire stepped back into the living room and reached for the hammer she'd left by the bookshelf days ago. The vent beside her hissed softly, then whispered, "She's almost here."
Claire gripped the hammer tightly. Her fingers ached from how hard she held it, knuckles white, wrists trembling. The footsteps had reached the second-floor landing. She could hear them above her, deliberate, steady, not quite human. The creak of each floorboard seemed to echo longer than it should, as though the sound were stretching. Then silence. The kind of silence that rang in her ears, begging to be broken. She held her breath and turned slowly in place, trying to decide, hide or fight. Another step. Closer.
now on the stairs. She backed toward the kitchen, away from the living room and the spiral. Another step. Claire passed the hallway. The air was different here, warmer somehow, damp with a low vibration. The spiral on the wall had begun to smear at the edges, not by hand, from within. Like something behind it was pushing, pressing forward, trying to emerge. Another step. Then from above, a whisper. Claire. It wasn't a plea this time. It was a statement. Recognition. She dropped to the floor behind the counter, crouched low, hammer raised in one hand. Her heartbeat was thunder in her ears. She wanted to scream, to cry, but she made no sound. And then she heard it. The floorboard in the hallway, just outside the kitchen, groaned under new weight. Something had entered the room. The footsteps stopped. Claire couldn't bring herself to lift her head, but she could feel it. Something was standing on the other side of the counter, not breathing, just waiting. Then slowly the edge of the counter began to darken, like shadow pouring down from above. A long, thin hand appeared at the edge, fingers too long, too narrow. The skin was grayish, translucent, like old wax left in the sun. The fingers flexed. Claire's mouth opened. A scream lodged in her throat. The thing leaned forward, its face just barely visible around the corner. It wasn't the man from the porch. It was a girl. Young, pale, eyes wide and black, reflecting nothing. Mouth too wide, trembling as if trying to form words she hadn't spoken in years. She whispered, "You forgot me." Claire couldn't move. The girl crouched on the other side of the kitchen counter, stared at her with eyes that didn't blink. Her mouth was slightly open, lips twitching like she was practicing a shape she had long forgotten. Claire's hammer clattered to the floor. The girl flinched, not at the sound, but at the wordless gesture, as if it reminded her she wasn't alone. Claire found her voice at last, a raw whisper scraping out of her throat. "Who are you?" The girl tilted her head and smiled. It was too wide. Not malicious. Worse. Grateful. "You knew me," the girl said softly. Her voice wasn't ghostly or sinister. It was soft, sad, and full of ancient hunger. "You promised." Claire backed into the cabinet behind her. Her knees shook. "I've never seen you before. I swear, The girl crawled closer. Her limbs moved strangely, jerky, like a puppet on strings, but not broken. Controlled. "You left the door open. When you were small." Claire blinked. Her vision swam. I don't remember." The girl's smile faltered. "No," she whispered. "You forgot." Her eyes darkened, spirals slowly bleeding across the whites like ink soaking into paper. Claire crawled backward, gasping. The room tilted. The spiral on the living room wall began to glow faintly. The girl stood now impossibly tall, her head almost grazing the ceiling. Her smile widened again. "You came back," she whispered. "Now I remember you." Behind Claire, the spiral cracked. A long, thin seam appeared at its center, and air rushed into it like breath pulled through broken teeth. The house was opening, and it had remembered its favorite door.
Claire turned toward the sound behind her. The spiral on the living room wall was no longer just a mark. The center had split open, barely a few inches at first, but widening. A crack carved downward through the rings like a wound splitting under pressure. From within came a sound she couldn't describe. Not a scream,
Not a voice, a mixture, like a choir underwater, singing a language not meant for ears. The air thickened with it. Claire staggered forward, the pressure nearly forcing her to her knees. Behind her, the girl giggled. It was small, delighted. "It's almost open," she whispered. Claire turned to her. "Who are you?" she asked again, breathless. The girl cocked her head. "I was Agnes before the wall." The name hit Claire like a stone. She remembered it now, not just from the floorboards, the shoe, the photos, but somewhere deeper. She'd been here before. A child, years ago. Just a brief visit. Her family renting the house one fall for a quiet escape. The house had been different then. Cleaner, brighter, but the hallway had still creaked the same way, and the closet in the upstairs bedroom had always made her uneasy. She remembered being warned away from it, but she had opened it anyway. She had seen a girl inside. Not alive, not dead. Something waiting. "I didn't mean to leave you," Claire whispered. "But you did." The spiral cracked further, pieces of drywall falling to the floor in chalky clouds. Behind it, Claire saw movement, something unfurling, something long and pale, like a limb or a tongue. The voice inside the wall began to repeat her name. "Claire, Claire, Claire." Agnes stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Now the house remembers you too." And with a deafening snap, the spiral split wide open. The wall peeled open with a wet, ripping sound. Claire stumbled back as a stench hit her. Mildew, rust, and something older, more organic. The spiral center was now a gaping hole, round and dark and pulsing faintly like a throat. Inside, something shimmered. Not light, not shadow, a space that bent inward, a space that should not exist. The hole wasn't just in the wall. It was in the house, in the memory of the house. Agnes stood beside her, watching with wide eyes that reflected nothing. "It opened for you," she said, like a child announcing a birthday cake. Claire's breath shook. "What's in there?" Agnes smiled. "Everyone." The words rattled through her, cold and final. The voice in the wall called again, now louder. "Claire, Claire, Claire." And then others joined it. Whispers layered on whispers, overlapping voices with no breath, no rhythm. Names, not just hers. Darren, Agnes, Willa, Thomas, June, Henry. Some she recognized from the floorboards, others she didn't, but they all spoke as one. A terrible, aching harmony. "You left us." Claire took a step back, but her heel struck something behind her, something soft. She turned. The hallway was gone. In its place was another wall, seamless, as if the house had redrawn itself around her. She was no longer in the living room. She was somewhere between the walls, and the spiral pulsed, waiting. Agnes stood by the opening now, her limbs twitching unnaturally. Her voice shifted, deeper, more hollow. "The house doesn't take people, Claire. It keeps them. You were always going to come back." Claire looked into the dark. The voices called her name again, but now they were closer, just past the threshold. "Come home." A long, pale arm reached out of the spiral. It didn't grab her. It offered. Inviting. Claire's fingers tingled with memory, with guilt, with something older than either, and the spiral waited to be entered.
Claire's breath caught in her throat as the arm extended from the spiral, palm up, impossibly long fingers unfurling like petals. It was not human, but it wasn't unfamiliar either.
The skin was gray-white, semi-translucent, veins like threads of smoke running beneath its surface. The fingers didn't reach for her. They waited. Agnes stood beside the spiral, her form shifting subtly now, hair moving though no wind blew, her dress flowing like it was underwater. Claire's voice was barely audible. "If I go in, what happens?" Agnes tilted her head. "You don't go in, you return." Claire shook her head. "I never..." Agnes stepped forward, face inches from Claire's. Her skin was colder now, eyes sunken deeper. "You left the door open," she said again, voice harder. "You left me behind." The spiral pulsed. The voices surged again, louder, more urgent, more hungry. "Claire, Claire, Claire." She clutched her chest as memories she didn't recognize spilled into her mind. A fire, a hallway, a child's laughter behind a closed door, a hand reaching for hers and letting go. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the house remembered, and it had made her remember too. Claire turned back to the spiral. The arm still waited, suspended, mid-offer. And now, shapes moved within the opening, not visible in form, but in presence. Shadows of people who no longer had voices of their own, trapped between breaths. One stepped forward. A figure in a familiar coat. The man from the porch. He raised his head. She saw his face for the first time, once kind, now hollowed by time and silence. He mouthed one word. "Please." Claire's hand lifted without her willing it. The house moaned. It was the sound of wood straining, of years bending, of memory too long locked away, cracking open like a rib cage. She touched the arm. The spiral opened wide, and then the world turned inside out. There was no sensation of motion, no falling, no weight, just a sudden and absolute absence of everything, as though Claire had been plucked from existence and dropped between the seams of reality. And then color. But not colored like she knew it. Shades that didn't exist in the visible spectrum, impossible hues that slid past her perception. The air, if it was air, tasted metallic and sweet, like blood soaked in sugar. She stood, though she hadn't moved, on what looked like a corridor, but alive. The walls pulsed gently, veined with threads of black and silver. Spirals covered every surface, large and small, some rotating slowly like they were turning gears in an unseen mechanism. She tried to speak. No sound came, but the house heard her anyway. "You remember now," it said, not in words but through pressure against her skull, a thought pressed into her mind like a thumb on wet clay. Shapes moved in the distance. Figures, silent, slow, walking in and out of doorways that appeared and vanished like thoughts. They weren't ghosts. They weren't people. They were memories, half-formed recollections of those the house had swallowed. Each wearing familiar clothing, each with a name stitched invisibly into their skin. Darren, Agnes, Willa. Claire took a step forward, and something whispered inside her ear, not from behind but from within. "We built this place from forgetting." Suddenly, the corridor shifted. The walls bent, the spirals unraveled into long, winding halls. Doors appeared on both sides, stretching endlessly. One door paused. pulsed softly with light. Claire approached. Her name was carved into it, not on a plaque, not written in ink, but growing from the wood itself, as if the grain had learned to speak. She reached for the handle. Agnes appeared beside her again, more real here than ever before. Her face was calm now, gentle, but her eyes were empty. Don't open it unless you're ready, because once you do, it won't just remember you. You'll remember it. Claire placed her hand on the door. It was warm, and it was breathing.
The moment Claire turned the handle, the door sighed open. Not with hinges, but with something softer, like skin parting, like lips. The light inside was dim, hazy, flickering like candlelight trapped in syrup. She stepped through. The room was small, familiar, too familiar. It was her childhood bedroom. Not how it looked now, but how it had been. The crooked dresser, the old teddy bear missing one eye, the little desk beneath the window with the sea glass paperweight her father gave her. Claire's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't thought of this room in over 20 years. The wallpaper was blue with little white moons. There it was, still peeling in the corners exactly as it had then. But this wasn't just a memory, it was living. The air smelled like dust and honeysuckle. Her old backpack leaned against the bed. A page from a coloring book lay on the floor. And there, sitting cross-legged on the rug, was herself. A small version, 7, maybe 8 years old, hair in uneven braids, socks mismatched, drawing spirals in red crayon on the back of an envelope. Claire stumbled backward, heart thudding. The child looked up and smiled. "You came back," she said. Her voice was soft, timid, full of wonder. Claire knelt slowly. She whispered, "What is this? Why do I remember this room?" "Because it's where you first heard the house. That summer, when we stayed by the cliffs. You opened the wrong door." Claire's memory flickered. A hallway, a shadow, a voice behind the closet. "You were supposed to forget," the child said sadly, looking down at her crayon. "But some part of you didn't." Claire stared at the spiral drawn on the paper. It was incomplete. 6 rings. "You kept drawing it," the child said. "Even after we left. Even when Mom told you not to." Claire reached out, gently touching the edge of the paper. The spiral pulsed beneath her fingertip, and suddenly she remembered the dream. That night in the rental cottage, the closet door open, a whisper calling her name, and a hand reaching out from darkness. Her hand had reached back. The connection had never been broken, not for a moment. And now, the house wasn't just a structure, but a continuation. Claire sat on the floor, across from her younger self. It was disorienting, the weight of memory and the physical sensation of sitting inside it. She could feel the old carpet under her legs. She could smell the lavender oil her mother used to put in the corners of the room. But this wasn't nostalgia. This was architecture. The house had built this from her. The girl looked up again. "You weren't supposed to see what was behind the closet, but you did." Claire's mouth was dry.
What was it? The girl paused, as though the answer was too big for her mouth. It was a mouth, but it wanted to be a window. Claire blinked. What? The girl frowned slightly. You thought it was a hiding place, but when you opened it, it saw you, and then it wanted you. The spiral on the paper began to spin. Not literally, but the lines shimmered, shifted, rearranged. Claire looked away. On the wall beside them, the moon-patterned wallpaper peeled back on its own. Behind it, spirals. Scratched into the plaster, faint handprints, a small, cracked porcelain face half embedded in the drywall. She remembered hiding in this room after the dream. She remembered waking up with black smudges on her fingers. Her mother said it was just crayon, but it wasn't. You left the door open, the girl whispered again. Claire looked at her. What happens if I shut it now? The girl's face darkened, not in malice, but in mourning. You can't shut it. It was never your door. The house groaned, softly from deep beneath. The air in the room thickened. The girl stood and pointed to the wall. The spirals on the plaster had changed again, and this time Claire saw it. They weren't drawings, they were maps. Corridors, chambers, doorways, a floor plan that didn't belong to the house she knew, but to the one beneath it, the one remembering her, the one now waking.
Claire traced the lines on the wall with her eyes, spirals that, when viewed as a whole, resolved into something much worse, a blueprint. A house, yes, but not this house. Bigger, deeper, older, layered. The girl beside her pointed at a section near the bottom, an uneven oval beneath the main floor plan, outlined in thick, erratic strokes. That's where she waits, she whispered. Agnes? Claire asked. The girl shook her head. No, Agnes was just a voice. This is the first one, the one who built the walls. Claire stared harder at the shape. It wasn't a room. It was a pit. A spiral turned inward with no center. A mouth, Claire said aloud. The girl nodded. The house grew around her, like ribs, like skin. She's not behind the wall anymore. She is the wall. Claire stepped back. The map seemed to pulse as she looked at it. The edges moved, squirmed, adjusted themselves. New rooms bloomed into being. Doors appeared. Hallways twisted. Where is this? Where's the pit? The girl turned and pointed to the floor between them, beneath the rug, where Claire was sitting. Claire's blood turned to ice. She reached down and pulled at the fabric. It came away easily. The floor beneath was wrong. Not the clean planks of childhood, not the splintered boards she remembered from dreams. It was black, wet, and warm. Claire's breath hitched. The floor pulsed. Then, a faint cracking sound. Hairline fractures snaked across the surface beneath her, not randomly, but in deliberate lines. A spiral forming again, this time not drawn, but growing. You've been circling her your whole life, the girl said quietly. Claire stumbled to her feet. The cracks spread. From within them,
A sound, wet, soft, rhythmic, breathing. Then, for the first time, Claire heard it. Not whispers, not memory, a voice from beneath the floor. Almost. The word reverberated through the room. Almost. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was inside her. Claire stumbled backward, away from the spreading spiral of cracks. The black floor shifted beneath her, almost like water beneath stretched cloth. The pulsing grew stronger, louder. She could feel it in her bones. The girl, her younger self, stood calmly, hands at her sides, her small face tilted downward towards the center of the spiral. "She's waking," she said softly. Claire's mouth trembled. "Who is she?" The girl looked up. Her face changed, no longer childlike, wiser, sharpened. She built the first room, before there were houses, before there were names. She was the space between walls, the silence in the corners, the dark behind the door. The walls around them began to ripple. The spiral on the floor yawned wider, and the cracks deepened. Claire saw movement beneath them. Not clear, shapes rising, stretching. She turned to run, to escape the dream, the memory, this place the house had created from her. But the door was gone. The room had sealed, and now there was only one way to go. Down. The girl stepped to the edge of the spiral, looking down with something like reverence. She's remembering herself, because you remembered her. Claire shook her head. "I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter. You're the last name, the key at the center." The spiral cracked wide. The floor split open, and Claire saw it. Beneath everything, beneath wood and memory and bone, was a chasm of writhing limbs, like a body that never decided what shape to keep. Eyes blinked open along the curved surfaces. Mouths whispered names. Some of those mouths were hers. The pit exhaled. Hot, wet air rose into the room. And from deep within the spiral, a sound emerged. Not language, not words, but recognition. The house wasn't hunting her. It was welcoming her home.
The pit yawned wider. Claire stood at the edge, her breath shallow, arms wrapped around herself. Below, the spiral unfurled endlessly, layers of stairs that weren't stairs, steps that folded like flesh. The walls pulsed as though inhaling her fear. "You don't have to fight," the girl beside her said gently. "She only wants to be remembered." Claire turned. "What is this place?" The girl blinked slowly, eyes too large now, too still. "It's the part of the world that doesn't end, just folds." Claire backed away from the edge. The voices from the pit rose again, but this time not as whispers. They sang. A low melodic hum in impossible harmonies, hundreds of them, thousands, each one distinct yet interlocked like bricks in a living house. She heard names in the melody, her father's, her grandmother's, Willa, and others, old, brittle names that hadn't been spoken in centuries. She felt them pass over her skin like wind through tall grass. The girl reached out and touched Claire's hand. Her fingers were ice. "She doesn't forget," she whispered. Claire looked down into the spiral. Somewhere below, she saw movement,
shapes crawling along the wall, moving up, not down, coming to meet her. "She's waking," the girl said again, "and you're part of her now. You always were." Claire shook her head. "No, I left. I forgot. I got out." The girl's mouth twisted, not angry, sad. "You can leave a place, but not a promise." A groan shuddered through the room. The air warped. The spiral began to rise. Not just a passage now, a throat. Claire stumbled back. The floor behind her cracked. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to step that didn't move. The house was shifting around her, closing like a mouth around a bite. She heard the attic chair creaking, the vent hissing, the phone ringing in the hallway, all of it at once. The spiral pulsed beneath her, and then she slipped. Not falling, sinking. The spiral opened wide, and Claire dropped into the breath of the house. Falling wasn't like falling. It was more like forgetting. Claire didn't scream. There was no air to scream with, no sense of movement, just the world stretching around her like warm clay. Time peeled away, language unraveled. Then she landed, softly. The floor beneath her was plush, pulsing faintly with warmth. She lay still for a moment, chest heaving. Above her, the spiral had sealed shut. The girl was gone. She sat up. The room she was in looked like a parlor, dimly lit by old sconces, faded wallpaper, a velvet chair in the corner, a grandfather clock ticking even though the hands never moved. She wasn't alone. The man in the coat sat across from her, silent. Closer now, Claire could see the sorrow in his face, the way his eyes didn't move, how his body barely breathed, like it had forgotten how. "Were you?" she whispered. He nodded once. "Darren." He nodded once. "You're real." He smiled. Just barely. "Sort of." His voice was dry, like paper soaked in ash. Claire swallowed. "What is this place?" He looked around. "It's the in-between," he said. "The in-between the rooms you could see in your dreams." She shivered. "It remembers us," he continued. "Each of us, what we feared, what we forgot. That's how it grows. That's how it stays." Claire stood. The walls creaked around them. "Can I leave?" she asked. Darren stood too. "You're not locked in," he said. "But if you try to go back up before it's done with you..." He didn't finish. Instead, he pointed to the far wall. A door had appeared, thin and tall, with no handle. Carved into the surface was a single word: confess. Claire stepped toward it. "What is this?" "The only way forward," Darren said. "And if I don't, the house will keep circling you forever." Claire touched the door. It was warm, and it opened at her touch.
The door opened without sound. No hinges, no resistance, just a soft sigh, as if the house had been waiting for this moment all along. Claire stepped through. The room beyond was dim and narrow, shaped like a chapel, but without pews, without altar. The walls were bare plaster, etched with spirals, most half-formed, fading as they climbed toward the ceiling. At the far end was a single chair facing a mirror. Her mirror. She knew it instantly. It was the one from her childhood bedroom, the one she'd avoided looking into during thunderstorms. Something in it always felt slightly off, slightly too reflective. She stepped forward and sat down. Her reflection stared back. Normal at first, then subtle differences. The eyes slightly darker, the mouth less certain, the skin too still. The mirror Claire leaned forward first. "You opened the door," she said. Claire didn't speak. "You left her." Claire flinched. I was a child." "You remembered," the mirror said. "That's why she followed." "I didn't know. I forgot for years. I thought it was just a nightmare." The mirror frowned. "But you kept dreaming of her." Claire looked down. "I didn't want to. I was scared." Silence. Then the mirror whispered, "Say it." Claire's throat tightened. "What?" "What you buried." Claire stood abruptly, hands clenched. "I didn't mean to leave her. I didn't know she was real. I thought I imagined it. I thought it was a game. I thought she wasn't..." Her breath hitched. "I thought she wasn't alive." The mirror blinked, and then smiled. "You've remembered," it said. "Now you can continue." The chair beneath Claire vanished. She fell again, but this time not down. Through memory, through guilt, through space built from echoes. And when she opened her eyes again, she was standing in a hallway. Not imagined, not constructed, a real hallway in her house. The spiral was on the wall, but it wasn't charcoal anymore. It was open. The hallway stretched before her like a dream remembered too clearly. The spiral on the wall wasn't drawn, it was carved now, etched deep into plaster and wood, churning slowly at its center like a drain pulling memory inward. Claire took a step. The air was colder here, heavier. Every breath tasted like dust and morning. The wallpaper had peeled entirely away, revealing more spirals beneath, some large, some tiny, stacked in columns like fingerprints pressed in soot. She passed the spot where her name had first appeared. It was gone. In its place was a new phrase, carved deep and wide. "You are the door." Her knees weakened. She kept moving. Each step down the hall brought back more than memory, feeling, grief, guilt, fear she hadn't named since childhood. It pressed against her ribs, climbed up her throat. The hallway widened. She reached the end, and the third door was there, the one that had been sealed when she moved in. Now it stood ajar. A warm breeze issued from the crack, scented like roses and something beneath them, earth and rot and time. She pushed it open. Inside was the room she had glimpsed in the dream, the room she had seen as a child. Only now it was clean, waiting. The bed was made, the wallpaper new. A single wooden chair sat beside the closet. The rocking horse stood perfectly still in the corner. And on the bed, a figure lay beneath a white sheet. Small, still. Claire stepped closer.
Her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. The air was silent, yet watching. The house held its breath. She reached out and pulled the sheet back. There was no body beneath it, only a mirror. Small, round, old. And inside it, her reflection, smiling, behind her. Claire spun, but the room was empty, except now the door had vanished. The spiral on the far wall began to turn, and she heard the voices return, but not whispering this time, singing.
The spiral turned, not quickly, but with purpose, each slow rotation accompanied by a low hum, like the grinding of time itself. The walls pulsed in rhythm. The mirror on the bed reflected not Claire's face now, but the spinning shape behind her, an endless echo. And the singing grew louder. It was a song with no language, just names woven into melody. Agnes, Willa, Darren, Claire, Claire, Claire. Each repetition of her name sounded different, older, younger, higher, deeper, like it wasn't just her, but every version of her that had ever existed, all being called home at once. Claire pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound was inside her skull, inside her breath. She backed against the closet door. It clicked, not locked, not jammed, but waiting. Claire turned, slowly opened it. Inside was not a closet. It was a stairwell, descending. Narrow stone steps winding in a perfect spiral, walls tight, damp, carved with more names, spiraling downward into darkness. The singing came from below. She hesitated. A new voice spoke behind her. "You opened it again." Claire turned. Agnes stood in the doorway. Not a child now, but taller, older, a young woman frozen in the moment of her vanishing. Her eyes glistened with black spirals. Her smile was soft. "You let it begin again," she said. "I didn't mean to. But you remembered, and now the house remembers you." Claire looked back at the spiral stairwell. "I can't leave, can I?" Agnes tilted her head. "You already did. That's what made you the door." Claire swallowed. The singing from below slowed, deepened. Now the names were farther apart. Agnes, Willa, Darren, Claire, and then a name Claire had never heard before. Mother. Agnes smiled wider. "She's ready." Claire stepped into the stairwell. The door closed behind her. The spiral staircase twisted downward with no end in sight. Claire walked slowly, her palm grazing the damp wall as she descended. The stone was slick, almost soft, etched with names and symbols that pulsed faintly as she passed them. The further she went, the more the light dimmed, but she could still see. There was no lamp, no torch. The house itself was lighting the way. The names on the wall began to change, less modern, older, worn, names in Latin, names in dead tongues, names that looked like stains. Some were scratched in claw marks, others were burned in place. Claire kept moving. The air grew warm, then hot, thick with breath. She paused when she reached a landing, only to realize there wasn't a landing. The staircase had widened, flattened, become a great circular chamber. She was no longer inside walls.
She was inside a mouth. The ceiling arched above her like a cathedral built of ribs. The floor was soft and spongy, dark with moisture. At the center of the chamber stood a stone altar overgrown with pulsing vines. Beneath it, the spiral was carved deep into the ground, wide enough to walk across. And seated beside the spiral, on a throne of black bone, was a figure. Tall, shapeless, a dress made of hair and teeth, a crown of old nails. Its head turned slowly. Eyes opened. Not two, many. They blinked in sequence, spirals within spirals. Claire fell to her knees. The air itself spoke, not words but pressure against her heart. "You are the last." Claire's voice cracked. Who are you?" The voice came from everywhere. "I am the room that was never built. I am the thought no architect dared draw. I am what waits in the silence between walls." Claire's throat trembled. "What do you want from me?" The voice softened. "I want to be remembered." And from the spiral at her feet, shapes began to rise. The forgotten, the taken, the remembered. Agnes stood among them, eyes full of something like peace. Darren, Willa, the man from the porch, more. They stood in a circle, surrounding the spiral, and began to sing again. This time, it wasn't a song of names. It was a welcome.
The song filled the chamber, not loud, but total, a vibration through stone and breath and thought. Claire knelt within it, at the spiral's edge, her name pulsing beneath her feet. The figures surrounding her stood still as statues, yet their mouths moved in unison. Soft, wordless tones, layered and resonant. There was no melody, no beat, only invitation. The crowned figure on the throne leaned forward. Eyes upon eyes blinked slowly. "We have waited long." Claire could barely speak. "For me?" "For memory. You are simply the one who remembered most clearly." The spirals on the walls spun slowly now, synced with the song. The very air seemed to breathe. Every tenant leaves the door open a little more, but only one becomes the hinge. Claire's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" The figure rose. It moved like silk over teeth, a shimmer of gravity and bone. Each step sent vibrations across the spiral, and the choir hushed, reverent. To leave is to forget. To stay is to rot. But to remain aware is to become part of the house. Agnes stepped forward from the circle. She was brighter now, whole, no longer the girl from the closet, no longer forgotten. "You don't have to be afraid," she said gently. "She doesn't keep us here. She holds us because someone must." Claire's breath faltered. "I don't understand." Agnes touched her shoulder. "You will. One more room, that's all that's left." The crowned figure extended a hand, long, gloved in shadow. At its fingertip, a key took shape. Not metal, not wood, something older, memory hardened into form. Claire reached out, trembling. Her fingers closed around it, and in the ceiling above, a door appeared, square, framed in ribs, glowing with warm, pulsing light. The final room, the original room, and it was waiting for her.
The key in Claire's hand pulsed, warm, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through her bones. It wasn't cold. It wasn't sharp. It felt alive, as though it too had waited to be remembered. She looked up at the door in the ceiling. No stairs, no ladder. Just a void framed in ribs, pulsing with the soft orange glow like candlelight reflected on flesh. The crowned figure spoke again, quieter now. Open it, and the house will be whole. Claire's voice barely rose above a whisper. And what happens to me? You were never separate. Agnes stood beside her, holding out a hand. Claire took it. The ground beneath the spiral shifted, rising slowly. A platform ascending toward the ceiling, toward the final door. She was lifted not by force, but by will. The house carrying her up, like a breath drawn in before the words were spoken. When she reached the door, the key lifted itself from her hand. It floated to the lock. Turn. Click. The door swung inward. Light spilled out, not blinding, but warm, like the first sun after years of shadow. It smelled like old cedar, fresh air, and something deeper. Home. Claire stepped inside. The room was small, simple. A single chair, a desk, a stack of yellowed papers beside a blank journal, and on the walls, pictures. All of them. Every tenant, every child, every lost soul the house had ever held, including Claire. But not as she was, as she is now. Her photograph was the last, still developing in a black frame, details fading into shape, eyes filled with memory, mouth parted as though speaking one last word. Claire turned to Agnes, who stood just outside the threshold. Agnes smiled. She needs someone to write it all down so it isn't forgotten again. Her chest ached. So I stay? Agnes shook her head gently. You remain. Claire stepped to the desk. The spiral turned once more on the floor, and the door behind her vanished.
Claire sat at the desk, the blank journal open before her. The paper was soft, slightly warm, as if it had been held by many hands before her. A quill rested beside the binding, old-fashioned, its ink welling from nowhere visible. She lifted it gently. No instruction was given, none needed. She knew what to write. The house no longer whispered, it listened. Her hand moved, slowly at first. She began with her own name, then the names of the others. She wrote of the hallway, of the spiral, of Agnes, of Willa, of Darren, of the priest with the trembling hands and the broken Latin, of the girl who never stopped waiting behind the closet door. She wrote until her fingers ached, and still the pages turned themselves, offering more space. As she wrote, the house shifted around her, quietly content. She could feel its shape stabilizing, the bones setting in place, sighing as it grew still. Her story was becoming its foundation, her memory its mortar. The pictures on the wall stopped flickering, fixed, framed in stillness. She looked up and saw them clearly now, faces calm, no longer blurred with pain or fading into dust. Even her own photograph, still warm from development, now bore the faintest trace of a smile. Not joy, not sorrow, peace. Claire stood, setting the quill down. The journal remained open, still pulsing faintly with her heartbeat. She stepped to the window, where there had never been one before, and looked out. Beyond the glass stretched a corridor lined with doors, some open, some closed, some waiting. She saw someone approaching, slowly, uncertain, standing at the threshold of the house. A woman. Tired, curious, holding a key. She recognized her. Not the face, the feeling. Another life, another remembering, another door about to be opened. She turned back to the desk and drew a new page and wrote, "She arrived just after midnight." And the spiral turned again. Claire watched from the window as the woman hesitated on the front steps. She had seen that body language before, dozens of times now. A tired shuffle, a pause at the threshold, the hand brushing the frame without knowing why. The house always pulled gently, never forced. It suggested, it invited. The woman, mid-30s, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, looked up at the second-floor window, not quite at Claire, but through it, as if sensing someone had stood there before her. Claire turned back to the desk. She began to write. Her name was Elena Rios, divorced, no children. She never believed in ghosts. The ink settled across the page with a strange shimmer. Claire felt the house respond, settling beneath her, shifting a hallway to welcome a new shape. A vent opened. A closet door whispered on its hinges. Somewhere below, the spiral pulsed once, like a breath drawn in. Elena stepped inside. Claire felt it, not just physically, emotionally. The first flicker of doubt, the scent of salt on old floorboards, the initial question, did I just hear that? Claire wrote on. She noticed the crack in the wall her first morning, but blamed it on foundation settling. She heard the phone ring. She didn't answer. Yet. Claire had learned not to rush. Each new guest brought something unique to the house, memories the walls hadn't tasted, shapes the spiral had never worn. The house wasn't a trap. It was an archive, and body of stories stitched into wood and plaster. Some stayed, some fled, some forgot, but all left pieces behind. Claire's role was no longer just to record. It was to guide, to remember so the house could remember. So she, the one beneath the floors, the first voice, could remain whole. Claire felt her footsteps now, echoing up the stairwell. Elena was coming. She would knock, or not. She would open a door she didn't mean to. Claire dipped her quill again and wrote, "It always begins with the whisper through the vent." And the house began to sing.
The vent in Elena's room sighed open just after midnight. Claire didn't need to witness it. She felt it, the way one feels a dream shift direction. The house had begun whispering again, softly, like testing the shape of a name it hadn't yet earned. Elena sat upright in bed. Claire could see it, even from her desk. The woman's breath held, her ears strained. The house murmured something simple, something harmless. Don't forget. Claire wrote it down. She almost laughed at it. Almost. But the voice knew just the right pitch, just the right tone. Below the floorboards, the spiral turned again. Claire felt the vibrations in her ankles. The rhythm was changing. Not rushed, just aware. The house wasn't opening. It was listening. To Elena. To the way she turned on music to drown out the quiet. To the way she placed her bag near the front door, but never unpacked it. To the way she paused every time she passed the third door in the hallway, even though it was sealed shut. For now. Claire stood and crossed to the shelf beside the window. Dozens of journals were stacked there now, leather-bound, hand-stitched, pulsing faintly in low candlelight. Each was a life, each a floorboard in the body of the house. She ran her fingers across their spines. Agnes, Darren, Willa, even her own marked with a spiral too deep to fade. She would write Elena's in time, but not yet. The house didn't rush stories, it gathered them. And already the next phrase had begun to form behind Claire's eyes, ready to be written. She thought the mark on the wall was a shadow, but it had never been cast by light. Claire smiled faintly and dipped her quill again. Downstairs, Elena paced the living room. Claire could feel it clearly, as if she were in the room herself. Each soft step over aging wood, each pause in front of the vent where the whisper had come. Elena pressed her fingers to the metal grate. Claire felt the heat of her skin. She was curious, not afraid, yet. Claire returned to her desk and wrote, "The spiral does not demand fear. It feeds on attention," and she was listening. The house responded with a low creak from the second floor like an exhale. A message had already been left for Elena. Faint, faint, faint. A charcoal mark on the back of a cupboard door she hadn't opened yet. A handprint on the mirror that didn't match her own. Subtle, gentle gestures. Claire had learned the spiral's pace. Too fast, and the house turned feral. It remembered too hard. Guests fled, doors closed, memory folded inward like rot. But slow became ritual. Slow made belonging feel like choice. Claire returned to the window. Fog curled in the corners of the yard. The oaks out front stood still as monuments. The man in the dark coat was back, just barely visible at the property's edge. He wasn't there for Elena. He was watching Claire, or perhaps waiting to become her again. She turned away. Elena had reached the attic ladder. Claire felt the shift, the tremble of old joints, the hush in the boards. The attic wouldn't be ready for her yet. It might show her something small, a box with no memory of its owner, a photograph that fades when held too long, little ripples. Claire wrote, "The house opened its eye, but not all the way." And beneath the desk, the floor pulsed with approval.
Claire sat at her desk, the house still around her. No creaking, no knocking, no whispers through the vents. Just the soft pulse of memory beneath the floor and the steady breath of wood around her. She turned to the final page of the journal, the last of this one, Elena's. The house had begun to settle again, full for now.
She dipped the quill one last time. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She opened the third door. The words spilled onto the page like water flowing downhill. Every line a memory made solid. Every sentence a weight lifted. Claire kept writing. She stepped into the room that remembered her before she was born. The room where voices become light, where stories are kept warm like seeds under soil. The spiral turned once more and welcomed her into its center. The candle beside her flickered, not from draft, from release. Claire stood. Her hand trembled slightly, but she felt no fear, just completion. She closed the journal gently, its leather cover sealed with a quiet pulse, warm, living. It hummed once, then joined the others on the shelf. 50 volumes now, 50 stories, 50 returns. She crossed to the mirror hanging on the far wall. She looked older now, not aged, not broken, just still. Behind her reflection, the room pulsed faintly with amber light. Spirals moved like tide pools in the glass. She saw the faces behind her: Agnes, Willa, Darren, others, smiling, waiting, not haunting, holding. She placed her hand on the glass. "Done," she whispered. The mirror shimmered and a door opened behind her, silent, seamless, full of light. She turned toward it, stepped forward, and the house sighed, content. Its walls cooled, its floor stilled, and above, on the first floor, a new tenant woke from a dream she couldn't quite remember, in a house she swore had just exhaled. Downstairs, a phone rang. Once, then silence. Then, a whisper. "Don't forget." And the spiral turned again.